Hello, this is OverlordBou, back with another ship review video, and today we'll be looking at the release of the first Dockyard ship, the Tier 10 Puerto Rico, or the Puerto Rico, as some of you may call it. Now, before I talk about the ship, I'll be covering the Puerto Rico Dockyard event. Now, she's obtained as the final reward after completing 40 shipbuilding phases, 34 of which can be completed by doing Dockyard combat missions. Now, players can purchase individual shipbuilding phases at 1,750 doubloons each, with a discount option for buying multiple phases at the start of the event. Now, while Puerto Rico cannot be obtained for free, completing all of the Dockyard missions will reduce her overall price to below that of a Tier 9 and Tier 10 ships. The Dockyard combat missions will last through update 11.7, 11.8, and the first 3 weeks of 11.9, giving the player roughly 2.5 months to complete the missions. After this, the player still has the option to buying missing shipbuilding phases until the start of patch 11.10. If the player has already obtained the Puerto Rico before this event, the player can choose an alternate reward, including one of the following: 35,000 doubloons, 33,000 steel, or 63,000 research bureau points. Now, this is enough to instantly buy any tier 10 for those respectable resources. Overall, I'd highly recommend participating in this event, as you can obtain a tier 10 ship for relatively low cost, along with other rewards that are given throughout each of the stages, like signals, economic bonuses, steel, coal, commander XP for XP, and more. Even if you don't plan on getting the Puerto Rico, the event still gives out a lot of good rewards, including the tier 7 destroyer HMCS, the Huron. My bad for that. Now, I will not be covering the Huron, as this ship review is focused on the Puerto Rico. And there are other videos on the Huron if you're interested in learning more about that ship. Now, more information on the Puerto Rico Dockyard event can be found on the World of Warships front page. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the Puerto Rico herself. As always, I'll be going over my recommended captain build, module setup, followed by her stats, and finally I'll give my thoughts about her performance overall. Now, first up is the captain build and upgrade shown on the top right. It is highly recommended to use a special captain for her, such as Doe Brothers or Halsey, for both improve the turret traverse and gun feeder. You do also take heavy AP on this ship as well, so make sure you take note of that as well. You can pause the video any time if you're interested in seeing the build, or running it down, or whatnot for you in the future. Now, let's talk about the ship stats, starting with her armor and survivability. Now, the armor will be shown on the top right. The Puerto Rico has a 27mm bow/stern with a 38mm deck, a 30mm upper side belt, and a 254mm belt with a 16mm superstructure with an HP pull of 71,650 and a 28% torpedo reduction system. Now, the ship does have a waterline citadel, very difficult to hit. It runs from under the first turret to the fourth turret, and it does have 60-second fires. Now, the Puerto Rico is a very difficult cruiser to kill, thanks to her good armor scheme and difficult to hit citadel. Her 27mm bow armor and aft can bounce up to 15-inch AP rounds, which is great when fighting certain French BBs or lower tier BBs. The 38mm deck armor is also quite useful, as she can bounce any BB AP shell from longer ranges. More importantly, her armor scheme hides her citadel very well from other ships, making her near impossible to hit under most situations. Unlike many other US ships, she can get away with mistakes that would heavily punish other ships, such as showing broadside. Now, she isn't as tanky as properly angled Masfa, Petro, or Napoli, but PR will prove difficult to kill even with suboptimal play. Her main issue is, though, the 60-second fires. As a consequence of being a super cruiser, unlike BBs, she can't take fire prevention to reduce its effects. Also, her armor is not thick enough to resist ships with high HE penetration like Hindenburg or Goliath. She will die relatively quickly to those types of cruisers, so definitely be careful of that. Overall, Puerto Rico is a very well protected for a cruiser, though not the same level as a Napoli or Petro. She will last for quite a while compared to any other normal cruiser. Now next up, let's talk about our main guns. She has four 305mm/50 guns with an 18.8 kilometer range, with a 22 base second reload, with a 30-second 180 turret traverse, and it can fire 35 degrees off of the bow and 35 degrees off of the stern. Her HE shell damage is 4,300 with a 51mm HE pin. Now they do give a 27% fire chance and have a 141k HE DPM. Now the AP shell damage is 8,900 with a 21mm overmatch and a 60 through 67.5 ricochet angle, and has a 291k AP DPM. Now the Puerto Rico does use a battleship dispersion, which is worse than a cruiser dispersion, but it does have the same exact guns as Alaska and Congress, having the same shell ballistics and performance. Now the dispersion of the Puerto Rico Salvos will be shown on the top right. Now the Puerto Rico guns can be thought of as the super cruiser version of a Buffalo. Though she has a slow reload and flop floaty shells for a super cruiser, they can hit fairly hard with their heavy 12-gun broadside. Her AP is very good, having improved bounce angles and good penetration. She can easily wreck broadside cruisers and even BBs under 8 kilometers with a good AP salvo. What holds Puerto Rico back is her poor accuracy, as she uses battleship dispersion instead of the better battlecruiser dispersion. It is partially offset by her 12 guns, but you'll notice the decreased accuracy at longer ranges and if they're using less of the gun instead of using a full salvo. Now overall, Puerto Rico's guns are respectable and will perform well in the right situations, but generally falls behind other cruisers in overall damage output. Moving on, let's talk about our secondaries. The secondary army, you get 8 twin 127mm/54 guns with an 1800 HE damage and a 4-second reload time, with a range of 7.3 kilometers and a 9% fire chance. Now you do get the normal secondary dispersion, which is bad. As normal for cruisers, Puerto Rico secondaries aren't worth mentioning, as Puerto Rico lacks any sort of torpedo armament. I will cover her anti-air next. Now for the anti-air defense, you get 5 inner flat clouds and 1 outer, with a long range DP continuous damage of the anti-air being 144, the mid being 420, and the near being 186. Now the Puerto Rico's anti-air defense is fairly good for a cruiser, having decent all-around anti-air that can be boosted by DFAA. Though she is a large target, her torpedo defense can help mitigate damage from torpedo bombers. Unfortunately, she's highly vulnerable to dive bomber attacks, both AP and HE, due to her large size and inadequate deck armor. Overall, she relies more on her HP pool and enemy CV skill to survive air attacks, though this isn't unusual for tier 10 cruisers. Now for anti-sub capabilities, she has a maximum of 2 charges, with the number of depth charges dropped per attack is 3, and they do a damage of 2600 with a reload time of 45 seconds and a range of 8 kilometers. This is the same ASW airstrikes given to most other cruisers, basically low damage but safe and easy to use. Unfortunately, it won't stop a half-decent sub from torping you to death, but at least it's something. So let's cover her maneuverability. She has a max speed of 33.5 knots with a turning radius of 910 meters, with a rudder shift of 15.9 seconds. Now the Puerto Rico is surprisingly average in terms of top speed, though in practice she isn't much faster than most other slower cruisers. Though her turning radius is decent by super cruiser standards, her rudder shift time is the slowest of any tier 10 cruiser. Overall, she comes up as below average for cruiser due to her awful rudder shift time. Now rudder shift in the 4th upgrade slot will offset this issue, which I recommend in the build. Overall, not very maneuverable, but this is mostly in line for a super cruiser. Up next, let's go over her concealment. Now the surface detection base is 16.1 kilometers with an aerial being 11.2. with the best surface detection being 13 kilometers and the best air detection being 9 kilometers. Now the Puerto Rico's detection is very high, more comparable to battleships and other cruisers. This makes it difficult to close to her optimal range without use of islands or other cover. Most notably, this affects her 10 kilometer radar effectiveness, as it can be difficult to tell when DDs are in radar range due to the large gap between the radar and detection. Overall, her detection is poor for a cruiser and is a notable issue in positioning her effectively. Finally, here is the consumables available for the Puerto Rico. Now, you get a standard cruiser damage control party with a 5-second immediate period and a 60-second reload. Now, you can choose between a standard defense AA or a DFAA or a standard hydro. I would say pick the hydro, but totally up to you which one you like. For the DFAA, you get 4 charges base, 5 with superintendent. That does 50% plus continuous AA damage, plus 300% flak damage, with a 40-second active time and an 80-second reload. For the standard hydra, you get 3 base charges, 4 with superintendent, with a ship detection of 5 kilometers and a torpedo detection of 3.5 kilometers, with a 100-second active time and a 120-second cooldown time. Now, you do get the heavy US heavy cruiser radar, which is 3 base charges, 4 with the superintendent. That does a 10-kilometer radar with a 35-second duration, with a 120-second reload time. Technically, Puerto Rico can use a fighter or a spotter plane instead of the radar, but I would ignore that option as it is far inferior to the radar. Now, the standard cruiser, you do get a standard cruiser repair party, which heals 14% base of the total HP over 28 seconds, 17% with the signal flag. You do get 3 charges base and 4 with superintendent with an 80-second reload time. Now, the Puerto Rico uses the same consumable loadout as the Tech Tree US Heavy Cruiser line, the Des Moines line, or the meme line. This makes her very flexible, having something useful against every ship class in the game. The radar especially stands out as it lets Puerto Rico deal with DDs, whether controlling caps or zoning them out. Now that I've covered the Puerto Rico stats, I will now talk about her overall performance, or my overall impressions. I'd say the skill floor is low, with the skill ceiling being high. So Puerto Rico is the Tier 10 US Super Cruiser, available in the namesake Dockyard event in 11.7. She can be thought of as a Tier 10 Alaska or scaled-up version of the Buffalo, having the same general attributes in the US Heavy Cruiser line, but in Super Cruiser form. Now, ideally wants to be positioned 12 to 15 kilometers away from the enemy, close enough to offset her slower shells, but far enough away that she can run away. Getting into radar range is tempting, but rushing in too early will simply get you killed. It is best for mid to late game when there are less enemy ships stopping you from pushing DDs away. Until then, radar is a great zoning tool to keep DDs away lest they face the wrath of your guns. Instead, play Puerto Rico more like a typical kiting cruiser, soften up the opposition with your guns until they are weakened for a push. Be on the lookout for broadside cruisers. One good AP salvo can take out half their health if aimed correctly, or luck is on your side. If the map permits, you can also position close to islands as cover. This helps offset her lower accuracy problems issues at longer range. Overall, I'd say the Puerto Rico is a solid, versatile super cruiser, having good AP to punish other cruisers and radar to punish DDs. There is rarely a situation where Puerto Rico is truly helpless, making her a dangerous opponent throughout the match. Now, for randoms, I would say that she's above average. Ranked, I'd say it's about average. The Puerto Rico can do reasonably well in ranked thanks to her 10-kilometer radar, making her effective against DDs. However, her mediocre firepower holds her back as she relies more on the enemy making mistakes to punish them. Smart DDs can dodge her salvos or just avoid her radar altogether. Still, her durability lets her hold the enemy's attention for a while, hopefully buying time for your team to make plays elsewhere. Now, for clan battles, if they're tier 10, it's unlikely to be used. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico lacks any specific niche that other cruisers outclass her in. For a radar cruiser, Mossford or Des Moines is superior. For durability, Petro fills the role better. This leaves Puerto Rico as a jack of all trades and a meta favoring specialized ships. She can function at the lower leagues, but it is unlikely to see significant use in Storm or above. Now, that is my review of the Puerto Rico. Again, if you don't plan on getting the Puerto Rico, that's perfectly fine. You can still do the Puerto Rico Dockyard event and still get the Huron for free. And there are plenty of awards to be given out throughout the Puerto Rico event. But the fact that if you already have a Puerto Rico, which some of us do, you can, once you get the Puerto Rico event done and you get the ship, you pretty much get to get either 35,000 doubloons, 33,000 steel, or 63,000 research bureau points, which means we get pretty much a free tier 10 of anyone we want in the game. So it's super cool that they gave this option for people that already have the ship, this option. So it's really, really cool of them to do that. So if you already have a Puerto Rico, you have something to grind for, and if you don't have a Puerto Rico, you have something to grind for, even if you don't want the ship. I would say the Puerto Rico is worth it. It is a good tier 10, but due to the pay to Rico event, it kind of sullied the taste of the ship in people's mouths. So that's kind of why it's always been kind of like dissed on, was due to that event. But anyway, that would be it for today's video. If you guys have any questions or concerns, definitely let me know down in the comments down below. But this is OverlordBou, and I'll talk to y'all later. Oh, big stretch, dude. Oh, big stretch, yeah.